Coming up, we're visiting with Sterlin Harjo, the co-creator of the hit TV series Reservation Dogs, plus an update on a landmark education lawsuit in New Mexico. I'm Malia Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from Indian country today.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is honored to be a supporter of Indian country today. ASU offers the only online undergraduate digital media literacy degree, teaching students how to recognize and combat inaccuracies on all platforms. They are using cutting-edge tools and tactics to separate fact from fiction in a digital world overloaded with misinformation. Learn more at cronkite.asu.edu.
This is Indian Country Today.
Gotwatsi Hopa. Thank you for joining us. I'm Malia Chavez. A former nurse who raped a permanently incapacitated Native woman will spend 10 years in prison. Nathan Sutherland pled guilty in September to sexual assault and abuse of a vulnerable adult. He was sentenced by a judge last Thursday. Sutherland previously cared for the woman who lived at Hacienda Healthcare in Phoenix, Arizona. She is a citizen of the San Carlos Apache tribe. In 2018, staff at the facility say they had no idea she was pregnant until they found her giving birth. The woman is a quadriplegic and has very limited communication skills. An investigation was launched and DNA tests prove Sutherland was the father. The woman's family says she delivered her son while severely dehydrated and without any pain medication. Sutherland has been in jail for nearly 3 years while the investigation and trial have been conducted. The judge who sentenced him says that time will be credited towards his total sentence, according to reporting by the Arizona Central. Neither the woman's family nor the San Carlos Apache tribe has commented on the sentencing. Well, tribal nations, U.S. territories, and states are set to receive $7.4 billion in 2022. The funding will go to improve water quality and access. This is the first installment from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that the Biden administration signed into law last month. At the White House Tribal Nations Summit, the administration recognized that chronic underfunding of Indian country has harmed infrastructure and tribal communities. The infrastructure bill is making investments that also include climate resiliency in tribal lands. The funding headed to tribes will help pay for the replacement of lead pipes and service lines, as well as water contaminants. A mentoring program is teaching First Nations people what it's like to be the stunt person in a movie. Imagine being the person who gets blown out of a car or has to fight the bad guys. As APTN reporter Tina House reports, the Indigenous Action Artist Mentorship shows what it takes to get into showbiz.
Here we go, camera's rolling, ready, and action! Bang, bang!
This weekend workshop put on by the Indigenous Action Artist Mentorship Program is all about teaching some up-and-coming stunt performers what it takes to get into showbiz. From being blown up in an exploding building, to racing cars, to doing action scenes and combat fighting. Being a stuntman or woman is dangerous, but according to stunt coordinator Bruce Crawford, it's also a very rewarding career. He started this stunt training course for Indigenous people because he saw a need.
Well, we really feel that there's a need for Aboriginal, our Indigenous representation in front and behind the camera. We need a lot more of it. There's a real need, particularly in the stunt industry, to build an Indigenous talent pool that we can draw from.
And for Marie Scotchman, who lives on the Musqueam Reserve, she has always wanted to be on film.
I'm super excited about getting this opportunity to dip my toes into the stunt business because it's opening doors for major opportunities for me.
Joining Bruce Crawford in teaching the workshop is Lauro Chartrand Devaye, also a stunt coordinator. He's traveled the world doing stunts on big Hollywood blockbusters, such as The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise. For Chartrand Devaye, he says he's living his dream.
I got to say, working on the film The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise for a year was probably one of my biggest highlights. We shot in Los Angeles for 6 months and 5 months in New Zealand. There's a movie called End of the Spear, which I did in the jungles of Panama and lived with a tribe there for 4 months, which was extremely life-changing. Jackie Chan, my God, what a great guy to work with. I did Rumble in the Bronx with him, and that was one of the most amazing experiences of my career. Drop it! Drop it! Bang!
Students are learning how to fall safely on a mat, how to handle weapons, and hand-to-hand combat. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
A special thanks to our partners at APTN for that story. And those are the headlines for Indian Country today. I'm Malia Chavez. Coming up, how has the trauma of federal Indian boarding schools affected today's Native students in New Mexico? We'll find out. But first, Sterlin Harjo is a Seminole and Muskogee Creek filmmaker. He has directed 3 feature films, a feature documentary, and the award-winning comedy series Reservation Dogs. Sterlin Harjo is finally enjoying the efforts of his hard work that spans decades. He nearly gave up, but found the desire to continue on, and now he has a hit series on FX and Hulu, and it just won 1 major award. Harjo now has a Gotham Award. The Seminole and Muskogee Creek citizen grew up in rural Oklahoma and studied art and film in college. An alumni of the Sundance Institute's Indigenous program and co-founder of the comedy troupe The 1491s, he joins us today to talk about his storytelling journey. Welcome, Sterlin.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Let's start off with this Gotham Award. Do you think that receiving this award validates Native people on television?
I'm not sure that the award does, but it's a great bonus. I think having the show on TV and the response that it has gotten, that's really validated us, I believe. And there's been a lot of decades and years where the idea coming out of Hollywood was that Native shows did not have an audience, or Native films didn't have an audience, and we've definitely proved them wrong. And I think that's only going to lead to more Native productions. And it actually is leading to more. I know that there's a lot in development right now.
Sure. And actually talking about this Gotham Award, we've seen pictures and videos of you and the major cast members, of course, being there. What does it feel like to be in these spaces where Native people aren't typically at?
I mean, it's great. It's about time, and, we were at the Emmys. Where we presented at the Emmys, and that was the first to ever be or see Native people up on that stage. And I think that people will just get used to it because we're here and we're going to keep populating these spaces.
Talking about, or I should say, reflecting on the journey of actually producing and creating Reservation Dogs, what did it feel like when you wrapped filming and you were kind of waiting for the world to see it? Were you nervous at all, or what was that journey like for you?
I was nervous, but I knew that we made it in such a good way, and it was such a community-driven effort that it honestly, in the end, I was so proud of it that it didn't really matter. I mean, it mattered because I want to do more. But in the end, it didn't really matter how people responded to it because it was about making it. It was such a great, satisfying feeling. And, I was able to bring a lot of my friends along with me. And that was enough to satisfy me for a lifetime. Once it did well, it was just a bonus, and it blew me away. So it was really exciting.
I'm sure many people ask you many questions about Reservation Dogs, but what's something that nobody's asked you that you want people to know about?
Yeah, Reservation Dogs, something in general. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what something is that people haven't asked me, but I think that, if you know me and you hear me telling stories, each episode has stories from my life, or stories that I've heard, or stories that I experienced. But from names to situations. Um, there's a moment where Laura Dannon tells the coach, who's played by Bill Burr, Laura Dannon, played by Deborah Jacobs, that his nickname that her mom used to call him, which is Chogeji, does not mean Great White Warrior. It actually means toilet. And that was something that I used to call my biology teacher / coach as a joke. And I told him that it meant Great White Warrior. And then he found out what it really meant because my dad told him. So all of these little anecdotes and jokes, there's a lot of stuff that come from real life.
That's great. I want to switch gears. The Muskogee Nation recently named a scholarship in your name. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. What an honor. They've named a scholarship after me. And I think that that's what it's all about, is bringing up younger people and helping them get ahead and open doors for people, so it's a very good feeling.
You mentioned earlier that there are a lot of new projects coming up. Tell us, what are you working on?
I have a feature film documentary that comes out today called Love and Fury, about Native artists throughout the country. I have another show that was announced yesterday. It's a Native heist show about a Native woman, the Native woman lead, based on a true story. And yeah, there's a couple of other things in development as well.
That's really exciting. And do you have anything in development with Indian country's, favorite ally, Taika Waititi?
We don't have anything else other than season 2 of Reservation Dogs. He and I will work together on other things. We've talked about stuff, but right now I think our hands are full with Reservation Dogs. So
2021, as a lot of people have said, has been a huge year for Native people and representation. On a grand scale, is this something that you thought you'd see growing up, and can you speak more to that?
I thought we'd see it because that's what I wanted to, that's why I was doing this career, is because I thought we could change the industry. And, you never know when it's going to happen, but I felt like it was coming, and here we are, and it's happening. And, it's very exciting. Shows like Rutherford Falls and other shows that are happening right now.
And for our audience who's just meeting you for the first time, before Reservation Dogs, you were, of course, a writer, a poet, a lot of other things. Tell us what your favorite projects were before Reservation Dogs.
All of my films have been close to me. Miko, This May Be the Last Time, Four Sheets to the Wind, Barking Water. I've done a lot of music videos with musicians like Samantha Crane. I have a podcast called The Cuts with Sterlin Harjo. I don't know. I just try to do as much as I can while I'm here on the earth, I believe.
And I want to talk about advice for Native youth specifically. When you're speaking to, Native kids, what do you say about what their future could look like?
Well, it depends on what they want to do. But as far as filmmaking goes, if they want to be filmmakers, I always tell young people to just create. You have to start now, and don't be afraid to put your stuff out there. You have the ability in your pocket on your phone to make films now. So, there's no reason, if you want to be a storyteller, if you want to do films, you can do it right now. And I encourage people to do it instead of waiting on someone to give them permission.
And that's a great point. There's so many ways to tell stories. You could, of course, be a journalist and report the news, but you could also make videos on platforms like TikTok.
Right. I think that's where, most storytelling is going right now, to platforms like that. And, people have the power to kind of curate their own stories for themselves, which is powerful. And, it doesn't mean you're going to be famous, but I don't know. I think that if you really truly want to be a storyteller, there's ways to do it right now as a young person.
I want to actually switch gears and talk more about Reservation Dogs, but for next season, is there anything else that you can tell us about, what to expect?
Well, expect all of your favorite characters to come back. And I can't give any spoilers, but I will say that, I mean, right now, when we ended season 1, the group is a bit fractured. And so I think that part of season 2 is watching them come back together. So, that's part of the fun of it. So I think that I can say that much.
And will we see a lot of the familiar faces that we see all the time in Indian country? I mean, season 1 had a ton of those, but will we continue to see them in season 2 as well?
Yes, you will, and you'll see more. You will see more now.
And actually tell us about that process of choosing these individuals to be on season 1 and season 2, as you just mentioned. How did you pick these individuals out, and what was that process like?
I mean, it depends. If it was West Studi and them, I was just a fan of their work, and I decided that I wanted to show them do comedic roles that they don't ever get to do, because they're always playing someone so serious, because the content isn't there for them. So, it was fun to let some of them go crazy with a comedic role. The young people, the cast that I cast, a lot of them were just auditioning, haven't acted much before. And it was just about giving kids the opportunity, going to communities and finding kids, and really just giving them the opportunity and the vehicle to shine.
And in your conversations with those younger cast members, when they reflect on the experience, what do they generally say?
I mean, they're blown away. Some of their lives have changed, crazy. And I think one of the coolest things is seeing Native kids throughout the country dressing up as their favorite characters. Halloween's such a crazy time for Native people, because we get to see people dressed up as like Pocahontas or generic sort of war chiefs or whatever. And to be able to have kids be able to dress up as their favorite characters on the show, that's pretty great and mind-blowing, and I don't know, it's just, there's a lot of the little things like that happen that I didn't expect, that I'm really grateful for.
Yeah, and of course, Indian Country Today reported on a lot of those kids who dressed up as Halloween costumes. And what struck me personally was that people were posting, like, all I had to do was go to my closet. I didn't have to go and shop for something, because, well, res kids pretty much have the same wardrobe.
One of my favorite things was there was a young Native girl who dressed up as the actress Paulina, who plays Willie Jack, dressed up as her at the Emmys in her dress, in the yellow dress. And the fact that she dressed up as her favorite actor instead of just her favorite character, I don't know, like, that was really beautiful to see.
Well, Sterlin Harjo, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back. In 2018, a major education lawsuit in New Mexico found that the state was failing to provide Native students with a quality education. Since then, tribal leaders and educators have been working for ways to fix this. Shaun Griswold is a reporter at Source New Mexico. He has been covering education, and he joins us now for some updates. Hi, Shaun.
Hello.
On a grand scale, tell us about the Yazzie Martinez lawsuit.
Yazzie Martinez lawsuit, it's a court mandate that is requiring the state of New Mexico to reform education. And primarily it's reform focused on a group of student classifications. So you're looking at 4 groups of students. You're looking at Native American students. You're looking at students who are English learners. You're looking at students with disabilities. And also you're looking at students who are living in poverty. And so the reform efforts are targeted to provide quality education standards for those students. The lawsuit was brought up by Wilhelmina Yazzie. She had sued on behalf of her son, who was an elementary school student in New Mexico's public schools. And the court ruled in her favor, which argued that the state of New Mexico was not meeting its constitutional requirement to provide quality education for that classification of students that I listed.
So as part of this Yazzie Martinez lawsuit, the state is now changing its social studies standards. Is that right?
Yes, New Mexico began the process to update its social studies standards, which hadn't been updated in 20 years. So you have to think about the type of things that have happened in 20 years. You're thinking of 9/11, you're thinking of Barack Obama being elected president, Donald Trump being elected president. There's just a number of different things that are just not required in social study standards. And that doesn't mean that teachers couldn't update and provide, some specific instruction on those topics, but they're just not required right now. And so the New Mexico is updating its standards, in part, not only just to keep up with the times, but also to try and meet that court order.
Social studies standards, and more specifically, this idea of critical race theory, has been in the news recently. You covered a recent public meeting to talk about changing these social studies standards. What did you witness there?
Yeah, so New Mexico, they're in the process of reviewing the standards, and they provided a public comment hearing several weeks back. It was about a 6-hour meeting, and I would say the conversation in a way was hijacked by this concept of critical race theory, and that's particularly targeted towards two standards that were proposed in this update that we're seeing right now in New Mexico. The main one is looking at the idea of identity and the idea of equity. And these are concepts that are introduced that are really providing this idea of how do students identify themselves when it comes to their background, their relationship to community. And then the idea and the concept of equity takes a really critical lens as to how New Mexico is structured. And a quick example of that is just providing the context and history of how New Mexico became a state or even just a place to begin with, understanding it from Spanish colonialism and contact to as well, and then into the U.S. Colonialism structure. And these are things that aren't necessarily taught in schools. For instance, I was a public school student in New Mexico, and we didn't learn about the Pueblo Revolt. We didn't learn about even the tribes that were connected to, if you live in Albuquerque or Gallup or any of these border towns. These are things that are just not necessarily taught in public school settings in New Mexico, which is an unfortunate and really strange fact to understand. And so some of the concepts that are being introduced focus in on the local and regional history for tribal communities in New Mexico. And the conversation in the public debate was directed mostly by individuals who seemingly were part of, I would say, a mailing list that was directed by the state Republican Party, as well as other conservative groups in New Mexico and from outside of the state, picking up on this national trend that critical race theory is going to be taught in our public schools. But that's not what these standards are. And the conversation was a little bit railroaded. You had several hundred people, over almost 3,000 comments were submitted to the state public education department. Many of them are people with concerns that were sort of focused in around that concept of critical race theory. But they kind of missed the mark because they oftentimes showed up a little bit misinformed or weren't really quite focused on what the actual effort in the social studies standards were, but were instead focused in on this idea of critical race theory, when essentially that's really kind of not what this is about. And seeing that conversation, what it's done is it's focused and caused a delay in implementing these standards. So these standards the social study standards were supposed to be approved this month. They're not going to be approved until next year, and they're not going to be seen in classrooms until the 2023 school year.
Sure. I want to move very quickly. We only have a little bit of time left, but the other part of your reporting has really been looking at how Indian boarding schools have affected the education that Native students get today. And you actually have been looking specifically at the Albuquerque Indian Boarding School, which is the second largest boarding school in the country. Tell us what you've been finding in that regard.
Well, that's another proposal for the social study standards updates, is to teach the boarding school history in New Mexico, and particularly the Albuquerque boarding school that existed here. And that's also not taught regularly in our public school systems here. So even creating a curriculum based around teaching that history is something that is standard. And that is something that is being pushed with the social study standard proposals. And so what's happening here in Albuquerque, it's a little bit of an understanding of that history. It's fairly new for a lot of people. A lot of people are disconnected in part from that history for a number of reasons. But what we are seeing here in Albuquerque is there is a concentrated effort, not only from education leaders, but as well as city leaders in the city of Albuquerque, who are trying to focus in around creating either history lessons or community events that teach the history of the Albuquerque boarding school. And a lot of that right now is focused in on a park called 4-H Park. It's a city park that was built over a gravesite where over 100 students and some faculty from the Albuquerque Indian School are buried. And that caused some community uproar once the history of that site became known. And then in response, the city of Albuquerque, as well as other community leaders, are focusing an effort to create a memorial as well as education plans around what that site, the history of that site, as well as the Albuquerque Indian School.
Shaun Griswold, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Before we leave, we want to acknowledge tomorrow's 80th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. One tribe near Phoenix, Arizona is paying tribute. The Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community created the USS Memorial Gardens. It displays both a flag once flown at the memorial in Pearl Harbor and a part of the original boathouse. This is the largest and only piece given to a tribal community. The flag was given to the community's American Legion Post 114. Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. local time, events will start with a 21-gun salute and a wreath laying. We'd like to remember those who gave their all in World War II. And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. Thank you for watching. For all the latest news and updates, visit us anytime at IndianCountryToday.com. I'm Malia Chavez.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run. Standing
This is Indian Country Today.